All right, and we are live. Hello, Mr. Morales. Feel free to introduce yourself to the audience that doesn't know you.
Good afternoon. How are you all? My name is Jorge Morales. I'm an attorney in the state of New Jersey, licensed in New York, but I don't really practice much there. And I recently retired, a few days ago from the US military, where I did about 39 years of service. I'm also a retired prosecutor from the state of New Jersey. Spent about 20 years in Hudson County, 6 years in Passaic County.
Right, you had an extremely extensive career both in the military and law enforcement, or rather the judicial system, I should say. Um, but
Yes.
yeah, so what was the story of that? Like, how did everything come about between you originally going into the military to then becoming a prosecutor?
Well, my family arrived in this country a while back. I particularly arrived back in 1981, and it was difficult dealing with the school environment at the time. We lived in South Jamaica, and I thought the military would be good to give me some structure and to see and I guess settle and plan what was going to be of my future. I came from Colombia originally, where I have family that deals or that works a lot in law enforcement. I had an uncle in particular that lived with us, that was a prosecutor in Colombia, eventually a judge. So I had that background, and I wanted to do actually something originally, believe it or not, in science. I want to be an astrophysicist, but the next best thing that I knew was about the law, and I figured, eventually I would go to law school or law enforcement.
Right, and it seems like you found a pretty good place in the judicial system. So,
I did. It took a while, but yeah, no, it's difficult getting your foot in. A lot of applications. I applied with NYPD when I was in college. Took every test, federal, local law enforcement. They originally called me to be in corrections right away, and I'm like, no, thank you. NYPD took a while, but finally they called me. But by then I was a resident of New Jersey, and I got into the probation department, and eventually just went to law school and got into the judicial system.
right. And the main part of your career, or at least a very important part of it that I noticed, was that you were the chief homicide prosecutor of Passaic, right?
That is correct. Yeah, I was the senior assistant prosecutor in charge of the homicide unit. I was there for about 4 years and as the person in charge for the last year of my prosecutor career. Very interesting, very busy jurisdiction when it comes to homicides, unfortunately.
Right. And when you led that, you led a lot of investigative groups for different homicides. What did you learn from doing that?
Oh my God, it's a difficult environment. What did I learn? An enormous amount of uh, things about interacting with people, with various agents at the federal, at the state, at the local level, uh, with victims. And really with victims' families. The helping them navigate the difficult system that it is sometimes, the judicial system, particularly when you are the relative of a murder victim. It is very frustrating, and I learned more than anything else how to be sympathetic to those people and help them navigate and understand the system that sometimes don't deliver the justice that they're looking for.
Could you expand a little bit on that part, the justice?
Well, and when I say that sometimes he will not or he cannot deliver the justice that people are looking for. I mean, you're looking for justice, obviously, your loved one, your son, your daughter, uh, your brother, your sister, your mother, father, all of a sudden has been murdered, and you want answers. A lot of times, especially in jurisdictions like Passaic County, is very difficult to get those answers that they're seeking. Uh, One of the things that people want to know is why. And I don't know if you're familiar, but I'll tell you now, and I'm sure some people and many in your audience are probably familiar with the fact that to prove a homicide, you don't need to prove motive. But to the families of those that have been murdered, motive is their sometimes the main thing and the only thing that they really want to know why. And unfortunately, that is a question that many times goes unanswered
Why does it go unanswered?
because a lot of times we don't know what's actually in the mind of those that commit these acts. We may be able to prove that they did it, how they did it, and sometimes we're not. But a lot of times we're not able to really show the why, nor are we required under the law to show motive, and that is difficult. Many people are not going to tell you what they did it. Many people, I don't think, even from my times as a prosecutor, not only dealing with homicides, with many other crimes, many people sometimes cannot even answer that questions from themselves for themselves who commit these acts. Uh, Sometimes people act out of anger, out of frustration, out of just a desire to eliminate the competition. Sometimes the answers that we can give are nothing but guess, and that's a difficult thing for families to understand and to deal with. Jurisdictions like the inner cities where a lot of homicides occurred, uh, those homicides are a lot of times very difficult to prosecute. The deal of dealing with the intimidation that the communities undergo from the gangs and the groups that control their streets is very difficult. Even good people, are unwilling to come forward. One of the things that, or the tools that we have at our disposal nowadays to resolve homicides are really those video cameras that are throughout installed in the streets and that are on people's phones. I mean, many times that's how we resolve crimes because getting the witnesses to come forward is is not only difficult for us to obtain, but it is difficult for the people that want to do the right thing to come forward and do the right thing.
Did you ever see that firsthand, or is this just a general statement?
No, that I saw this firsthand. I mean, for example, I had videos where, there are 40 people. You can count people in the videos where homicide takes place. Nobody sees anything. Nobody saw anything. And sometimes these people feel that they can commit their crimes with impunity because they know that their actions terrify the community and that nobody would dare speak against them. So we develop other alternatives and other ways of being able to solve these crimes. They involve a lot of technology, uh, developing informants and whatnot. But the informants get you so far. You cannot take an informant's information if you want to protect that person to trial. I mean, you will not be able to use that evidence, and not unless you're willing to burn that informant or that person that comes forward. So sometimes we may be able to learn what happened, but we don't necessarily have the ability to bring it to court. And it is very frustrating, again, not only for us as prosecutor, well, I'm a retired prosecutor, but it's frustrating for the people that have to do this job and for the people that want the answers, the families.
When you talk about alternative methods to witnesses, right? Because most, especially police, will look at witnesses as a very key part of everything, right? As if
Of
you
course.
can get somebody to, testify, that adds a totally different weight to the investigation. But if you can't get to witnesses, or you can't get to enough of them, or you can't really accurately interrogate them, what are some of the alternatives?
Well, everybody carries one of these, and I'm holding in my hand a cell phone. And cell phones nowadays are, I mean, they're computers. They have access to or they link up to many things. So one of the things that we do in an investigation of not only homicides but many crimes is such things as geofencing, trying to get the global positioning of those devices, try to find out the subscriber information, getting subpoenas from all these technological companies to try to put people at the place at the scene, to try to match that information to what we see sometimes on what turn out to be many times to be silent videos, from either public cameras or cell phones that we obtain from interrogating people, witnesses, uh, suspects. We sometimes secure their telephones and obtain a world of information from them. And it's not that easy. I mean, it's not like you can just take somebody's phone and just go into it. I mean, you have to show probable cause. You have to have the right basis to get into those instruments. I mean, our private lives are in those instruments, and it's not easy to get a court to nowadays to give you the access that you need. So it requires a lot of know-how, a lot of and a lot of technology, really. Those geofencing practices are very useful in putting somebody in a place and trying to ID them through other methods.
Well, when it came to the suspects that you're talking about, right? Did you ever feel a sense of sympathy with them?
I don't know if you can call it sympathy. I obviously felt sympathy for victims, for their relatives, and sometimes the victims, they didn't particularly have clean hands themselves. But I think more than sympathy, I think I always felt a sense of obligation to do justice, and I mean, you know, taking away somebody's liberty is a tremendous power. I don't think that even prosecutors themselves, particularly the young prosecutors, understand the power that they really yield. Sometimes they view themselves as powerless, bureaucrats or government employees. But the power of a prosecutor is enormous if you really think about it. And I was always very conscientious of the fact that my actions and my work can take away somebody's liberty. I mean, that is probably the most precious thing that we have, our liberty, our ability to breathe free air and to go and come as we please. So I was always very conscientious that my work will take away somebody's liberty, and sometimes for a very long period of time. I mean, we no longer have the death penalty in New Jersey; it was abolished, but uh, but I was always very conscientious of that. And I always wanted to make sure that whatever work I did, whatever investigation, whatever case I did, that it was done right, that it was done for the right reasons, that we put people away that needed to be put away. And sometimes, the people that commit these crimes are not necessarily evil. God knows that in my years in the judiciary and in the criminal justice system, I've come across some evil people. But thank God, for the most part, they're just sometimes people that commit very evil deeds indeed, but that are not necessarily evil. So I don't know that I will call it sympathy again, but just a sense of doing right by doing my job the right way, to make sure that if I was going to take away somebody's liberty, it was done in a justifiable manner.
Well, when it came to like gaining the evidence against these people, right? And in some of these cases, very evil, right, malicious people, was there ever times you were certain that you had won, like you had made this awesome case and then you had ultimately lost, or even the opposite, where you were certain you had lost, you hadn't really had too much evidence and you had ended up winning?
Well, I think that any prosecutor that think that they have too much evidence is got a problem already, and that's being overconfident. You can never have too much evidence. Period. No matter how good the case is. But George, just to correct you a little bit, I don't think that a lot of the people that I dealt with, that I prosecuted, were particularly evil people, but they did indeed commit evil deeds. Uh, and my philosophy in prosecuting was that I never lost a case. Okay, that's one thing that I've always it's a certain thing that a way of about my job that I came about that helped me do my job, feel good about my job, no matter what. And it is the fact that I never thought I lost ever, and this is why. There were sometimes cases that I prosecuted and I won, and I never prosecuted a case that I didn't think deserved to be prosecuted. So when I won, justice was done. And there were even cases where I would win and I would not even ask, even after having gone to a trial, ask for a custodial term for a defendant because I didn't think if I didn't think it merited. And that may be an odd thing, but even that was the case. But even in the cases where I would send somebody to prison, I would feel very comfortable sending that person to prison because of the mistake, the crime that they committed, and because he deserved it. But there were the cases that I would just flat out lose. Okay, that that I mean the person would go would walk away free. And you would say, well, Mr. Morales, how do you feel about that? I'm like, I honestly, if I prosecuted a case, it's because I felt and I knew that that person was guilty. Okay. But when I did lose, when a jury came back and returned a verdict of not guilty and that person walked out of the courtroom, I still felt like a winner. Why? Because if those people were truly evil, if those people really didn't learn the lesson of going through the risk of facing a very long time in prison, and then they will not commit another offense. But if they did, then I will get the shot of prosecuting them again. And God knows that unfortunately there were people that I prosecuted multiple times. There were multiple cases. And if I never saw them again because they learned their lesson and because they didn't want to go through that again and because they realized the wrong ways that they were in and they did something to correct that course in their lives, then I still won. So that's why I felt like I never lost a case, no matter what. And that was my attitude with everything. Did I ever feel like I should have won and then was shocked by the fact that I lost? No. If you deal in this business, you realize that particularly when it comes to trials, trials are before people just like you and me, and people have different ways of thinking and whatnot, and uh, it doesn't matter. I learned early in my career, and as many of us do, that even when you think you have a solid case, a jury may just surprise you and come back with a result that nobody really understands. And so I learned to accept that. I just always wanted to make sure that I did my part. Uh, Guilt or innocence was in my part. Obviously, I prosecuted those that I thought were guilty, but guilt or innocence was not my decision under our system of justice. That belongs to the jury, and it's a great system.
Well, when you were doing all these investigations, were there any of them that like still stick out to you even now?
Oh God, there's so many of them, and I think about a lot of them a lot of the time. I mean, not only homicides, but I prosecuted a case one time where a little girl, 4 year old, was raped multiple times, and it was a not guilty verdict. Okay, and I knew it was going to be a not guilty verdict, because of issues that occurred during the trial. So I was not surprised by the result, but I was extremely traumatized by the fact that I couldn't deliver the justice that that little girl deserved. Um, I never did see that particular defendant again. Got uh, I hope that he probably saw the evil ways of what he was doing and corrected them. But yeah, that was a very long time ago. But there are many others homicides that are just brutal, senseless. Um, uh, the manner in which they're executed, I mean, really speaks of whether or not somebody's evil. And again, a lot of homicides that I prosecuted were, you know, let's call it accidental homicides, but there were some that were very personal, and you can see the evil, and yeah, no, I can see all those images in all those cases. They, they haunt my thoughts from time to time.
When you say that the method of murder was kind of what spoke volumes in some cases, right? Um, what do you mean? Like, as in, because when I think about murder, and when most people think about murder, they think about it as usually either usually as a crime of passion, right? Like it happens very usually in a heated moment, right? And guy catches his wife cheating with his best friend, and then one thing leads to another, and somebody gets stabbed, right? Like that happens, but is that really the truth? Is that like as common as people think it is, or
Well, and you see, George, here is where we get involved into what we call technicalities in the legal system. Okay, so in here we're talking about, is there murder? And then you just describe a situation where somebody may act out of passion provocation, and that becomes passion provocation manslaughter and not murder. And it's a different degree and a very different punishment. Justifiable homicide, a law enforcement officer who has to discharge their weapon and take a life, commits a homicide. Is it murder? Okay, murder is the criminal definition that we give to the person that actually undertakes actions to take away somebody's life, hoping that that's what they want to do, and that that's what the result will be. Okay, so that is murder. Something short of intent to kill, but that results nonetheless in death, is something else in our system, and we call it something else, and it carries different penalties. But sometimes, I mean, even within the, and again, getting into technicalities and whatnot, and I don't want to bore your audience with that, but we get into issues of, okay, transfer intent, which happens a lot in the shootouts between gangs in the inner cities, where they shoot at each other, but they're idiots handling weapons, and they don't even know how to aim, how to shoot, and while they trying to take the life of another opposing gang member or whatnot, you get a stray bullet that goes and takes the life of a little girl walking down the street, of a little guy, or another guy that was just on his way to the store to buy some groceries, or of an innocent bystander that just happened to, look at what was going on, and, just happened to bite a bullet and take away his life or her life. Unfortunately, there were many cases that like that I handle, because these people, very, believe it or not, very rarely do they actually kill their intended targets. They usually end up killing somebody else. So that's where we have the transfer intent, because they intended to hurt somebody else and to cause significant bodily injury, to cause death. That intent transfers to the person that they ultimately kill. And that's where we have a murder that may be unintentional. That's when we get also into that area where I was telling you, where how do you answer the relatives that are asking you the why when you have a situation like that? So yeah, I mean, it is difficult. I'm sorry, and I think I lost the thread of your question, but yeah, no, it's I mean, we get very technical with the definitions. Murder is, there's very different shades of homicide, let's call it. One of those is
right,
murder.
right. Uh, well, is there when it comes to in general, very very generally speaking of people that commit homicides, right? Mainly
Right,
intentionally premeditated homicides, right? Is there
right.
any common traits within their personality that you've noticed?
Uh, I don't know that there are. I can tell you that in the many cases that I handle, a lot of the traits are, street gangs that don't know better, don't have a good upbringing, and uh, So I don't think that they even particularly set out to commit murder. They just think about taking out their competition. I mean, I can tell you that I've come across some people that went out to do exactly that, to shoot it out with an opposing gang and take it alive. And when they realize the enormity of what they've done, you know, they they really reflect on it. It's too late sometimes, but they do. It's not very often, but they do. Traits. What traits are there that can show that anybody's capable of murder? I think that the fact that we are human beings and that we all have free will, and that sometimes, I guess some people are better formatted throughout their years to exercise control over their emotions, over their anger. Um, uh, I mean, anybody's capable of murder. The more uh, innocent person that you can see in the street, I'm sure that can be triggering to into not necessarily committing murder, but into taking a life. I can tell you that, and there is a book out there by a very famous, at least in the military circles, Colonel Grossman, uh, who is a psychologist, who's an infantryman, who wrote a book called On Killing, that tried to get into what you are asking me about. I mean, are there any traits, and how do we desensitize people, particularly these young people that commit most of the murders and the crime in the inner cities, to do what they do? And he takes in that book an approach talking about the history of mankind, really from very old times in the art of war and whatnot. And we have all these video games that teach you to shoot people and kill people in the video screen, and it is so easy that sometimes, that's how we desensitize these young people in the streets to sometimes pull that trigger in without thinking much about the fact that they're taking a life, you know. And I guess, in a sense, there are a lot of things in our culture that teaches us that life is very cheap. Um, Hopefully, in many instances, I've seen people realize how precious a life is. Unfortunately, that comes a little too late.
When could you expand a little bit more on that part? Like they take a life and they really didn't mean to, or like they took it and they didn't realize the I guess the gravity of their actions, or
Well, like they take a life, meaning to take a life, but then once they do it, dealing with the consequences of it, watching the relatives, the families of those victims in a courtroom, staring them, asking them questions, screaming out why. The drama that occurs in the courtrooms, and not only in New Jersey but across the world, when a case is being tried. I mean, some people actually reflect on it and realize the enormity of what they have done. Sometimes, and a lot of times, cases don't go to trial, and we deal and we take pleas. And when a plea goes through and it's accepted and there is a sentencing, the judge gives the opportunity to relatives to speak, to the defendants to speak, to the relatives of the defendants to speak. And then you see all this outpouring of emotion, of regret, of remorse, and so I mean, thank God, very few times you don't, but many times you see that, and that's when I tell you that people, when they come face to face with the reality of what they've done, uh, they realize it, and hopefully they change their ways. But when I say it is a little too late, is because, I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but the penalty for murder in New Jersey is life. Sometimes, depending on the circumstances, life without parole. And in New Jersey, a period of life is calculated on our life tables, and that is 75 years. 75 years that potentially can be without parole. And even when those special circumstances are not present, an 85% of 75 years, which is what, 63 and a half years or something like that, that a person will have to go to prison without parole. or committing a murder. So, it is those are in fact the crude and real consequences of what happens, and the consequences that some people come to realize when it is too late.
Are there any major motivating factors when it comes to premeditated murders and homicides usually?
In most of the cases that I work, unfortunately, they were, like I told you, gang related. And yeah, the motivating factors: territorial domination of a drug corner, okay, or simply, the fact that somebody else looks at you the wrong way or is trying to move on your territory. Drugs, robberies. I mean, there are those that love to rob the drug dealers, believe it or not. I mean, we talked about drug dealers and everything, but drug dealers are quite often the victims of a lot of murders and a lot of robberies. Because, of course, and that's where you see a lot of evil people. That's what they do. They go and they know that those people got money, and those drug dealers are quite often the victims of some horrible crimes, some horrible murders. So yeah, those motivating factors are there. I mean, a lot of times murders committed to get into a gang and stuff like that. Yes, you see that is rare. A lot of times he's just trying to knock out the competition, and guns is the way of dealing with those situations. And if you are using guns to deal with those situations, well, you need to realize that people can get hurt, and people can get killed.
How do gangs tend to operate? I think
Oh my God, the dynamics of we call experts to talk to us about that, and even them, I mean, there's the dynamics of how these groups operate is amazing. I mean, these older people in the gangs try to brainwash these younger kids and into doing things, and they take advantage of that how they operate. I mean, there is a whole code of the streets, I guess, and uh, there are many experts out there that are very good at deciphering those codes. I mean, the graffiti that you see in the streets, especially in the inner cities and everything, you can read the entire history of these groups and what they do and what they're up to and what they have been doing and what they have been up to, just by sometimes reading the graffiti in the walls of the inner cities.
that's interesting. I've never heard that before. How does that like is it like dog whistling almost or
Well, yeah, yeah, that is their form of communication, of telling each other, "Hey, stay away from here. This is our territory." Of saying, somebody, is looking for you. Somebody's going to get you. Somebody got you. We'll get you. Or we're more powerful, or whatever the case may be. It's pretty interesting dynamic. I'll be happy to introduce you to some of the people that I've attended the seminars and I've invited to speak about these things, gangs in particular. I mean, there's so many of them, and they're so different in the way which they operate. Some very sophisticated, some just very rudimentary, just thugs. But some that have a tremendous amount of sophistication. I mean, drug cartels, they're gangs, and the Bloods, the Crips, the Sureños, the Norteños, the Mexican Mafia, I mean, you name it, the Latin Kings, the Nietas, all of them, different, forming different places under different circumstances with different idols, but all with the same goal of, money, power, and crime, I guess.
is there any common traits amongst their leaders usually that you've noticed? Like, are they usually just power hungry people, money hungry? Like what's like some common factors?
I really don't know. I mean, power is something, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, somebody said, right? So that tends to be the goal behind everything, money and power. money and power, and some people that don't care how they achieve it.
Right. And we were talking a little bit about recruitment before from different gangs, and you mentioned how murder could be one of those recruitment tactics. It's rare, but it happens. Um, could you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, well, a lot. Unfortunately, there is a lot of single moms and even single dads out there, kids that don't have a good structure, and that's who these groups target. And even the people, and even now with the social media and everything, these people are getting into regular kids all over the place, into their homes through these social media and whatnot. And I mean, I guess that's a good way to recruit. I mean, typically, in the old days, it was just the kids that didn't have any supervision hanging out in street corners being approached by all these older thugs. But now they just approach your kids, in the internet, and they try to get them to do the stupidest things, to prove themselves. And that's a way of recruiting, I guess. But I mean, the methods run the gamut.
Are you speaking again from experience, or is this more of like a general statement?
Now, from experience, I've seen a lot of and now I mean I retired back in June of 2022. I now do criminal defense work, and I have done a lot of defense work also in the military. I was a soldier for some time, but I retired as a JAG, and did that for quite some time, to defend a lot of cases. So yeah, no, I've experienced and seen the investigations of what some of these predators do with our kids. Um, with technology nowadays, for example, I mean, they get people and kids to do horrendous things, even to themselves, mutilation, self-mutilation, things of that nature. It's amazing how powerful these people are through these means, through these mediums, through social media, to get to kids early enough that they manage to brainwash them. Uh, so so have I seen it in a lot of my cases? Yeah, unfortunately, I have.
Is there any change in your perspective from the time that you began as a prosecutor to when you retired?
Changing my perspective, no, I think that there's there is. I've always been a firm believer in justice, and I've traveled the world. I've gone to I've been in Mexico, for example, when they try to transfer there to a different system of justice. And no justice. I can tell you that the United States, despite our problems, despite our things, I think we have the best system of justice in the world. I think that the adversarial system and the jury system is the best. It doesn't always yield the results that you hope for. I do see that a lot of times, there are agendas that are in politics that get on the way of justice. But overall, I do have hope for the system and for many of the people in it. And I do think that, for example, many people wonder, I'm like Mr. Morales, especially if you really knew who I was as a prosecutor. I had a reputation as being a very top prosecutor, and I don't think that many of the people that see me now saying Jorge Morales for the defendant uh, thought that they would ever see that or hear me say those words. But overall, I believe in justice, and I think that justice now in my role as a defense attorney, holding the government to their proofs, to their standards, and upholding the rights of individuals. It's another way of doing justice, you know. And like I said to you before, I don't think that too many people are evil, but there are some, and a lot of people do commit mistakes. And now I'm in a position where I do hope that I can bring and that I can help some of those people get the break that they need sometimes from the justice system, and mend their ways, and that justice is delivered properly by the government. I so no, justice again. I don't I don't think that it was too weird of a thing for me to do defense work, only because it is the system that I know. But because when you're doing justice, it really doesn't matter much where you are. I always try to be a fair prosecutor, and as a defense attorney, I always try to hold the feet to the fire of those that are in charge of that, of delivering that justice to our citizens.
Right. And like even with the flip, right? You're going from the person who basically led the investigation now to the person who defends, right? The individual, the perpetrator, the defendant, whatever you want to call them. Um, is there any like that didn't even change your perspective?
Uh, I don't, George, I'm sorry, but I really don't understand, really change my perspective.
Like on anything, like very generally speaking, right? Like on and it could be anything as small as like, you've
I,
seen people, yeah.
I can tell you this, for example, one of the things that the prosecutors don't get to see is to really learn and see the person that they're prosecuting. They see the crime. Okay. For the most part, most people, the judges, the prosecutors, they only see the crime. Me as now as the defense attorney, I obviously gotta see that and what it is that the prosecutor wants to bring forward, but I get to know the people. Okay. And I think that bringing that aspect to the prosecutors so they understand the people that they're prosecuting better, to learn whether or not somebody is deserving of a break, whether or not somebody is deserving of punishment, and at the same time a break. And I know that's sounds kind of like an oxymoron, but yeah, you can deliver justice. You can hold people accountable. They have to pay their price for the wrong that they committed, but yet it can be done in a way that also is mindful of the fact that sometimes people make those mistakes and deserve a break. I'm in a better position now to do that, and to understand that. Well, I told you before that I was always very conscientious of taking a person's liberty. I guess that now, as a defense attorney, I understand better why that is very important.
Right. So you see them almost a little bit more in a personal manner now.
Yeah, I see. I get to see their humanity better, and thank God that most of us still have some humanity left in us.
Has
Sometimes
there
as a prosecutor, you get into that, like, you just see the crime and everything, and sometimes you feel like, or you tend to feel or want to feel like you're just dealing with things, with evil things, with evil deeds, and you forget that there are people behind all these dynamic.
this might be a little bit of, I guess, a corny question, but in terms of, is there any person that you could label as the most evil or like the most deliberately just off-putting criminal that you as a prosecutor had to look into?
There were two people in my career that I have no problem with them serving their multiple life sentences. Um, One was a female, one was a male. That female was responsible for the deaths of grandmother and some of her grandchildren. Uh, and that's exactly what she wanted to do. She wanted to take their life only for revenge. Revenge over something so stupid and so insignificant, such as a dispute over, you know, a landlord tenant dispute, basically, that turned extremely evil. That woman was evil as they come. That woman, and I was only a probation officer when that happened. I wrote her pre-sentence investigation report. So I got to talk to her. She was prosecuted multiple times. Then the death penalty was taken off the table. That's when the death penalty in New Jersey was still available. But if there was anybody that would have been deserving of the death penalty, it would have been that woman. And then there was another gentleman that also killed multiple people, um, just again for some stupid stuff. Some woman that didn't want to look his way, and he felt jealous of her, and then trying to kill her and trying to find the means to do it ended up in him killing the person that gave him a gun without bullets, and the person that had also committed another murder back in Puerto Rico with a personal weapon, a very personal type of homicide, with a knife. You got to be very personal and very, and uh, and that gentleman too was older, handicapped, believe it or not. And when I talked to him about his sentence, uh, he didn't care. He was like, "I'm only glad they're dead," So the I saw evil, true evil in the eyes of those two individuals in particular. There are a couple more, but those two in particular. So yeah, that I did.
When you prosecuted these people, right? Was there anything about them that specifically stood out? Was it their demeanor, their personality, just the way they talked? Like, did they just seem very empty?
Sometimes you get the privilege of seeing some of the words that they say, interviews, interrogations, things of that nature. But more than anything, I mean, the eyes are the mirror to the soul, I guess. And you can, I truly believe that when you look at somebody's eyes, I mean, you can learn a lot from a person. And yeah, you can see evil. You can see evil in these people's eyes. Um,
What is the solution to a lot of these types of people that, you know, one day just wake up and decide, I'm going to kill my landlord's grandma and grandchildren, or, like in those circumstances, like you were saying, right? That just wake up and decide to, end like 17 people's lives.
George, I don't think that there is a solution to something like that. I think that we live in an imperfect world, and I think that the only thing that we can do is try to do justice for the transgressions that some people commit upon other people. That's where we exist as a society, or that's where we uphold our rule of law. I don't think that you can prevent it. I don't think that you can predict it. I think it just happens, and sometimes you just got to deal with it. And our system of justice is the best way that we know how to deal with it. I do believe that, uh, for example, like I told you, I mean, men in New Jersey is no longer the case, but I do believe that there are those that do deserve the death penalty. Um, and um, all the justice we can deliver to those people in a state like New Jersey is to, convict them of the murders and give them life sentences or as many years as we can to keep them away from the rest of us.
So ultimately, it comes down to us as a society, and also those in charge of upholding the rule of law.
Absolutely, and I mean, when it comes to, I mean, that. is when I'm talking about dealing with evil. When it comes to talking about violent crime in the inner cities and the gangs and everything, I mean, we as parents need to keep an eye on our children. We need to always be looking and making sure that they're raised properly, that they spend their time in positive things. I mean, for example, you're a very young man and doing amazing things, you know. So congratulations to you. But yeah, as a society, we need to spend our time educating our young in the proper manners of a civil society, learning, teaching them to respect other people, to respect our ways, to respect our society itself. I don't think that we have a lot of that in making our communities places where people thrive, not where people, you know, see no future. Unfortunately, that is the sad situation in our inner cities, Chicago, you know. And holding people accountable, I do believe that, unfortunately, we have a system, I believe, in many places that gives too many breaks at in the early stages of I guess to call it something of the criminal. I think that the system needs to be a lot tougher on the young offenders, so they learn those lessons, hard lessons, early enough. Because typically, we have a system where it is so forgiving of transgressions by young people, and we keep coming up with more excuses that uh, people just learn that they can get away with things, and and become selfish, and that's all they learn. We need to hold young people accountable. I think in times past, uh, people mature much rapidly than they do today, and they had a much more um, solid base on who they were as a people in their place in society than people do nowadays.
Well, even in my English class, we read the Shawshank Redemption, and we looked into, like, the prison system and such. And a very big critique of the prison system is that it doesn't seem to be as focused on exactly giving criminals opportunities after they've committed a felony to get them out of that sort of lifestyle, right? You know, and I wonder what your thoughts on that would be.
Well, is the system that we have. I mean, the philosophies behind corrections are many, and that's a whole topic, and we can spend months discussing it. But I do believe that yeah, it is difficult. But I mean, they tried. I mean, they tried to have some rehabilitative programs and whatnot, and it's one of the philosophies behind incarceration. You know, the ability to rehabilitate. But yeah, no, we keep looking, especially politicians and all these laws that they pass. And a lot of times they just want to look good. They look at what they're doing about crime and everything. But yeah, and listen, I believe in strong punishment for serious offenses. But God, yeah, we need to be able to come up with more creative. And I don't pretend to know what those ways are, but I do think that we need people to start thinking about ways that we can really reintegrate those people in a very positive way into society, in a meaningful way into society. Um, because otherwise, I mean, sometimes people have no options in life, and you close doors. And yeah, we can preach, I mean, one door closes, look for another one, and fight hard and all that stuff, but we cannot make it impossible for that to happen. And sometimes it seems like that's what the system does. Like, for example, let's take, I guess, a little side note here, but expungements in New Jersey. I mean, they used to happen relatively quickly, but it right now takes forever to get an expungement done. I don't know how many times people call me. I couldn't get this job. I lost my job because my expungement hasn't been granted, and I have something that should have been expunged. And it's difficult. So we need to be a little more conscientious of things like this. Listen, if we're gonna give a break, we need to give the break, and we need to give it in a timely way. What is it that they say? Justice delays, justice denied. Very, very, very truthful statement, and it comes also in the way of uh, helping those that need to be rehabilitated and that need to be given those second opportunities.
And what about for minors, right? The juveniles that commit the crimes, because those are often I would consider the most important ones, right? They often don't understand. It's kind of on impulse. Sometimes, they're with a group of friends and then they do something stupid, right? Peer pressure is a very big part of that. As we got into a discussion with gangs, even, right? In the very extreme of peer pressures. So how do we what in your opinion should be done for the juveniles?
I think that we need to start teaching parents how to be better parents. Okay. Period. I mean, peer pressure and all that stuff. Yeah, those are factors that those happen. But we need to hold people accountable, young people accountable for their actions. And many times I would even go as far as parents accountable for the actions of their children, you know. Uh if anything, parents need to pay attention to they bring in kids into this world, and it's not just, making a kid is not that difficult, but really being a parent to that kid is where the challenge is. Not too many people are up to the task, yeah, unfortunately. So
Right.
how to help those kids? I think that there are a lot of programs for kids and everything. I think we're just making too many excuses for them. I think tough love, tough love. Yeah, recognizing all those dynamics, but holding them accountable.
Right. So,
Mm.
you know, because the way I see it is, like it has to be within reason, kind of like what you're saying, because sometimes kids, especially people, just make a mistake, right? And they do something and then they regret it afterwards, like you were saying, again, kids especially. But how do we, when you say tough love, like how do we exactly go about this?
Oh my God, I really, George, to be honest with you, I don't know. I could begin to answer that question. I mean, I seen the programs. Okay, I seen, and most of the programs are it just a judge or a probation officer signing off. Okay, don't do it again. Come back in 6 months if you stay clean. You're gonna get everything dismissed and whatnot. Um, I don't know that the words are there, but the meat to the bones is not there. I think that the programs need to be more meaningful. Now that especially because of COVID. Okay, before you were required to come in once a week to meet with a group of people, and we were going to discuss, you know, coping mechanisms and ways of dealing with our anger and everything. But since COVID and everything, oh, we're gonna do it over Zoom. Okay, it is not that when you're trying to hold somebody accountable or whatnot, I mean, it is so easy to lose people and so. No, we need to start doing things back again, face to face, dealing with the people, perhaps arranging meetings to the extent that that can be done between offenders and victims. uh I think I haven't seen a program really like that. I mean, you hear it happening occasionally when the some people make the request to do that, but I think that our system needs to come up perhaps with a better way of getting these two groups to meet in a meaningful and productive way. I'm not sure that that is advisable in every single case, but I am sure that that can be done in many cases, and that we can streamline it to a point where we can get a hell of a lot of good out of that. But again, it's all theory and just wishful thinking at this point.
Right. I'm, I mean, has there ever been people, like kids especially, that you've seen that have just totally turned their lives around? from any of these programs, or?
I'm glad that you asked that question, George. I have. I actually know of a particular guy who should remain nameless, who was a gang member who was in and out of the Hudson County Jail for years, stealing money, dealing drugs, doing drugs. And that gentleman turned his life around because people got involved in his life, because people wanted to help and, you know, be on his face to face, helping him. I went to his wedding, me and my wife, we were invited to his wedding. He has a family, he has a house, he has a car, and he turned his life around. So yeah, there is hope out there, you know. And there are people that if you actually met this one guy in at his lowest, you would never think that there would be hope for that guy. And he still makes a believer out of me, believing in people, you know. Yeah, given the right tools, the right circumstances, the right environment, people will thrive. People will surprise you. People can do evil things, but oh my God, people can do the most wonderful things also.
All right, I think that's a pretty good place to end off. All right, I'm
Thank you very much, George. I really
yeah,
appreciate this opportunity.
of course. Come back anytime. I'm gonna stop the screen recording. I'm gonna stop recording here, and we'll talk a little bit after the show. All right. Any last words?
No, just do the right thing, everybody out there. And if you see somebody in trouble, take action. Okay, don't be a spectator.
All right. Yep. I'm gonna stop recording now. All right, and stop recording here.